Hey, we're back with another episode of Unbuffered, this show from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I'm Christopher Mitchell, and I run the Community Broadband Networks program. And we have on one of my favorite guests over the years, and I'm actually recording this intro after we did the show, so I can tell you the show is really good. We've got Roger Timmerman, who's the executive director of Utopia Fiber. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Thanks, Chris. I always love talking broadband with you. It's a great privilege to be here with you.
One of the things that I think people will enjoy from this interview is when we talk about Ookla and the study they did about your network. We talk very clearly about how it works and sort of the what we can take away from it, what we learn, and not just kind of the highest level details. We talk about a lot of tech stuff, and we end up in the end talking about kind of what's coming next with municipal broadband and some advice for folks. But it's a fun journey along the way. I want to start off by asking you about a study that just came out. So, I guess the quick is like, what's the 5-second version of what Utopia Fiber is?
Well, Utopia is a consortium of cities, so we're municipal fiber. And you say, well, what municipality? We have 11 members that created us, but then we've expanded out to doing 23 citywide projects.
So you're like a private internet service company that has to comply with open records requests and all kinds of other obligations that come with being owned by cities.
Well, we're not private. We're a
Right.
public agency, but we operate a lot like a private company, right? The things that we do are typically done by private companies out there in the industry. But we have all the negatives of being a public agency. All the compliance stuff. Granted, like all our records get requested or financials posted all over the place, things like that.
You get drugged through the mud unfairly, which is also common of public more than private, I think, although it kind of hits everyone sooner or later. But yeah, no, you're right. And the reason I said that in that way, you're right to correct me because you are absolutely public. But you've always been a nimble, efficient operator, which is not to say the public cannot do that, but like we want to hold you up as a model of how to do that. So it's something that you have a lot of history. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But for people that are like, yeah, I know Utopia, get to the good stuff. I feel like I wanted to start off with this interesting study. Ookla, which studies the speeds of different networks around the country, they studied a number of municipal networks, and you were one of the ones that they studied. And I did a good job of explaining that you're an open access network in their report. So you're a little bit different in terms of how much control you have over the end user experience. But what was your top takeaway from what Ookla found?
There was a few things in there. We were scored number one in latency, and we're like, yes, we do a lot of work to make sure our system just performs as good as possible. We don't go cheap on our equipment. We try to be prudent with our spending, but it is a carrier class network. And that's a industry term used a lot. It's actually, we talk about that saying, hey, the service we deliver is basically a carrier Ethernet circuit to every location, every single residential customer. It's not actually even a PON network. It is a dedicated system. And that does help us on the latency, right?
Right.
Shared systems are on time division, and so it does cause some latency and jitter and other things like that.
So just for
Um,
people that aren't as technical, a PON network is what most of the fiber to the home customers have across the United States. It's effectively a shared network where your connection might be shared often with like maybe 30 other customers effectively, and you don't do that. You are a fan of active Ethernet, and I feel like you kind of got the credit that you need from Ookla, recognizing that it made a difference.
I think that was probably the primary reason why we have the best latency out there.
Although there's
Um,
other active Ethernet networks out there, it's just that yours came in at the top. So, and I want to talk about other stuff you got out of Ookla. But when Vince Cerf was talking about why, in his mind, Google wanted to get into fiber and why they did a gigabit service in particular, he always said it was about latency. He didn't think people needed to go in excess of 900 megabits a second. He wanted to have a large pipe that had a heavy margin because he thought latency was super important. And as people have a choice between multiple high quality internet options, I think quality of service, which includes latency, is the most important thing on the network. So it's a big deal.
We get that feedback quite a bit that we might have somebody on our lowest tier, which is a 250 meg service, and they're comparing that to, a cable connection where they're like, well, I was being sold multi-gigabit, tiers on this, and I don't know what the thing is, but everything is just zippier. It's just more responsive. My Facebook's, doom scrolling, whatever is, it's just working better when I'm downloading things or just interacting on the internet. All the things I do just seem to work much better, even though I'm on a 250 meg tier compared to this gig or multi-gig here. And that's the difference, right? When everything you do, it's not just like, hey, here I am, give me that content. When you load a web page, for example, there could be thousands of get post, interactions between your browser and the server, pulling data from all over the place, from ad tracking things to third party things, images. All those things are various interactions, and all of those have latency associated with them. So when you have low latency, everything just works way better. And that's just basic things. I mean, there's so many different applications. We get into AI applications or, home automation. I mean, you turn on your lights, you want them on, right? You don't want to be, it's on, waiting a little bit. I actually have this little problem. I switched from some Philips Hue systems to Govee, and I'm fighting with some latency issues. And I'm like, it's driving me nuts, right? And latency is important. And I think people see that, but they don't understand what it is, right?
Yes. So, what else in the Ookla report? As someone, because it can be helpful to get feedback on your network from outside sources.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look at it, I'm like, why are we number one in every category? I'm a network guy historically, so I'm like, I want our network to be the very best, and I want us to perform the best. And so here we are, and it's like, oh, I didn't get number one on speeds. But that's largely because of our tiering. We have a 250 meg tier, a gigabit tier, a 2.5 gig tier, and a 10 gig tier on all of our networks. So really, we are building a 10 gig network to the home, but to accommodate the pricing tiers and low income options or whatever it may be, there's feedback and interaction with our service providers to figure out what works best for them. The result of that is that we have a 250 meg tier. So you have lots of these people running speed tests on a 250 meg tier, and that's killing our results, right? So that hits us a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
when you're compared against a company, in this case G Fiber, that only has a gigabit tier, I don't know, a little bit surprised that Ookla chose the methodology that they used, and in terms of just lumping everything together. I think it still paints a picture that is very attractive, but we saw that in every market that they studied, is that different providers had different tiers, and that significantly skewed the results of the averages. Is curious.
yeah, so I mean, we could immediately improve our speed test results by eliminating lower tiers. It's not really an indication that our network's better or worse. It's just kind of, where rate limits are and what the results of what happens when people run a bunch of speed tests.
It feels like it was evidence in favor of the open access model that you're a champion of as well, which is to say that you have all these different service providers and they're all doing a good job.
Yeah, well, so the flaw or the test methodology that they use is a little bit flawed for open access. Uh, we're showing up there because there's enough customers on our system that show up with a Utopia fiber IP address and run a speed test, right? And you say, well, wait, why is that even happening? It shouldn't be happening. Utopia is wholesale only transport layer 2, and the service providers come in with the internet, their own IP space and routing and all that other stuff. We do operate a wholesale ISP service. So some of those ISPs choose to use our IP space, routing, peering, and all that upstream connectivity. And many of them use their own. And in the past, we wouldn't even show up in Ookla results. People are like, hey, this is one of the largest networks in Utah. Where are they at? They're not even on the list. So the results of our 19 residential service providers plus so many other business providers, I would say probably a fifth of them are the ones that show up on Utopia speed test results. So it isn't really capturing the full spectrum of an open access system and what's happening with all the service providers. I mean, really, we need to go in and say, hey, can you guys figure out which ones of these service providers are on Utopia, and then like group those together and do a whole bunch of strategy with Ookla to figure out how to do that. But over the years, we've seen more use, not statistically more use, but just we've gotten bigger, and so our subset of customers that are on our IP space that is Utopia fiber has grown, but the providers using their own IP space have grown dramatically too. So
No, that's interesting. I mean, there's all kinds of nuance to this stuff, and that's one of the reasons I like having you on, as opposed to a CEO somewhere who doesn't even understand that. And then if they did understand it, wouldn't talk about it. They would just kind of slide right by it.
maybe hopefully somebody learns something about how all these things work, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why people tune into this show, I think. I mean, and one other thing is just that most municipal networks have fewer than 50,000 subscribers. I would, if I had to guess, probably only 3, maybe 4 have more than 100,000 subscribers. There can't be that many. And you're definitely up there. I think you may probably have more subscribers than any other municipal fiber network.
Chattanooga has a speed. I don't know exactly where they're at, but they're over 100,000 subscribers. On our system collectively with our partnerships, we're about 83, 84,000. So
Oh, I thought
they're
you passed
larger.
100,000. Okay.
Well, we've passed 280,000, right? So we've passed more addresses. Chattanooga's
Right.
connected more customers. So,
Yeah.
depending on what
No, I
category,
use past in the
you know,
sense of like I thought you had
oh, passed.
exceeded. Yeah. So
Yeah, we're
yeah.
number one in passings.
Okay,
We'll
so you're
take that.
approaching, yes, and you're approaching that 100,000 limit, which I can only imagine. Like, I mean, I don't know if Fort Collins can even get that high yet, and Knoxville probably hasn't had the years yet to build that up. But there's a few that will have that scale potentially in time. Now, does that include your work in Idaho and Montana, where you're involved in the network, but you have different relationships with each client?
Yes, I mean those are a small subset compared to what we have in Utah, but they are included in those numbers. So I'd have to pull off mm, 10,000 subscribers from Idaho Falls. They just crossed that threshold out of remember how it's something like 30,000 house and that they've passed. So there's those types of numbers that are in those other partnerships. Really, just the two, Yellowstone and Idaho Falls, and then
Hmm.
we're launching a bunch of stuff in California, but we don't have those completed yet.
Yes. How's that going?
It's going well. I mean, we're in the bidding process. So if there's anybody watching that's in the construction or engineering space or technician, or there's a lot of roles out there for contractors to be had. The Golden State, those are all under the Golden State Connect Authority umbrella, and so on their website they have all the bids posted for those, and that's all moving quickly.
Yeah, that's an exciting project where we see a lot of the rural counties being active and then the state really trying to find good long-term sustainable solutions for connections in those areas, as opposed to the historic process of throwing money at whatever companies are the best at lobbying.
That's I love that expression because that really is what the history has been. Is just like, well, things are bad, throw money at them. Well, they're still bad. Let's throw some more money, and it just hasn't worked well. So, that was a pretty big pivot in California where they're allowing public agencies to do broadband and funding them even. And so, yeah, we're really excited. We're excited about our project, our partnership there with Golden State Fiber, which is the marketing name of it, with the agency's Golden State Connect Authority. But there are a lot of other cities and consortiums of cities that got FFA grant money in California or other financing, funding or grants. And so there's a lot going on in California.
Now, let me ask you about when you first got involved with Utopia. And let's not tell the Utopia story. Let's tell the Roger Timmerman story. So, how did you first become active with Utopia Fiber? Well, back when it was just Utopia.
Well, I mean, the first time I came in on the technology side, I was a network engineer, network engineering manager, whatever, in technical roles. I got pulled in to be the CTO. And this was a time when Utopia was in a really bad state. I was like, I don't know how reliable this thing's going to be. I don't know if they're going to make it. They had just refinanced their debt. They were on the verge of falling under or defaulting on their debts. They had in the refinance, they pulled out about $8 million of cash to survive on, which at their burn rate was about a year, and that's how much they were losing, while not even covering any debt service. I mean, it was bad, and so I was like, but I believe in this. This is really cool. And I was at Provo City and that fiber project, and that one was actually really successful compared to Utopia. They had 10,000 customers. They had hit the take rate targets and all this stuff. And then they screwed it up for political reasons. It wasn't the failure that people claim it was.
Hmm.
They've been thrown under the bus because they ultimately did give it to Google. There was this whole thing that they skip over in between where they privatized it, gave it to a company that didn't know what they were doing, and they drove it into the ground. And then they were in a desperate position to end up giving it to Google. But it was messed up before that.
Well, this
But
was
when it
the
was a
early
city
years. I mean,
project,
it was a whole different world back then. Like we're talking about
yeah,
mid 2000s, and you all, I feel like you all demonstrated the lessons that then everyone else learned. And private companies were making making these errors. Private companies were making the same dumb mistakes with wireless networks and fiber networks. Like the business models were getting worked out. That's what happens in those times.
it was rough in the early 2000s. So anyways, things were kind of going haywire at Provo. I saw Utopia was kind of the nearby big brother, but it was not. Provo was ahead of them. Utopia was fledgling. It was financially in trouble, but it had enormous scope. Lots of cities across the state, and I was very interested in it. I got pulled in as CTO. We re-architected the network. We fixed a lot of stuff. We fired most of the companies involved because it was all outsourced. It was basically a few government people writing checks, and they got taken advantage of. Consultants and contractors, and then it's that story we hear over and over and
Who
over.
who I think had like big dreams. They weren't like people that were like, let's rip off these cities. They were like, we could do this thing. And they didn't realize that they did not know how to do that thing, I think. Right. I mean, there's three things that I
There
feel
was
like
some of
happened.
both. There were
Okay.
really good people, and I think there were some people who were. There was Utopia was basically funding the company to go do other stuff outside of Utopia.
Okay. So this is where I feel like I want to name three things that I thought were super important, right? Bad technology choices, right? They did that. They famously just really overbought early stuff that wasn't ready for prime time, and then they were stuck with it. Two, didn't really know how to get on the polls and ended up kind of screwing themselves with not having poll access and not being ready for the games that incumbents were playing on the polls. Not entirely their fault. Like some of this was still being learned about. Three, the rural utility service pulls funding from them in a way that later turns out to have not been appropriate, and Utopia ultimately wins after many, many years in the courts. You're proven that the USDA, our rural utility service, made the wrong decision in pulling funding from you. Those are three things that I identify. One of which was totally self-inflicted, and the other two are kind of like you didn't see it coming necessarily.
Was a comedy of errors, right? A lot of things, and many of them not self-inflicted. I mean, there was a lot of opposition, right? And partners that were bad
Right. I
and
mean, the state
political
literally changed the
pressures.
laws to try to like kneecap you. So,
We still deal with that. I mean, they just passed a law this year that made it harder for cities to do fiber projects. It's like, come on, guys, is this ship not sailed? Like, people love these municipal networks. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we need to keep harping out there. Like, and the Ookla report kind of points to that a little bit. Like, the customer satisfaction is amazing on these networks. People love these networks. They're doing well. But that's not, there's cities don't have the lobbying resources that Comcast and Lumen and these other companies have out there to badmouth it. And so you go survey politicians and they're like, oh yeah, municipal fiber is not a good thing. You go survey, people, real people, and they're like, we love it. It's awesome. It's the best thing ever. It's like,
yes.
how does that happen?
Yes. Okay.
Welcome
So,
to the world of lobbying.
you were sharing your experience. So you're the CTO at this point, and you're getting ready to take a break, I think.
Yeah, so I come over as CTO. We do lots of technical stuff. I mean, I'm going in there pouring through, thousands, tens of thousands of lines of code, trying to understand what the heck. This is a different platform. We were on an Alcatel-Lucent platform, which is now the Nokia platform, and it was a much more advanced network than what they had at Provo. And I just remember pouring through this thing. I'm like, okay, I understand this. I don't understand this. And I was like determined to understand this network so that we could operate this and kick out the companies that were really running it for Utopia. Mm. And and there was good people there, but the cost was insurmountable.
Hmm.
So, anyways, I go through this and I'm like, well, this part of code, it just doesn't make sense. And I'm beating my head over this. Like, I got to understand this, and ultimately come to the conclusion, well, they screwed this up. There's all sorts of problems, right? I mean, they got like top Alcatel Lucid engineers writing code, and they screwed this thing up. And anyway, so we did a big overhaul of the configuration of the network, the hardware, lots of upgrades, because they didn't have any money to really do what they needed to do. So first step, make this thing good, make the service reliable, top notch, whatever, because they were having outages and all sorts of weird stuff. We fix it, it's good. Then we go build some networks with the little money we had. We did a assessment project up in Brigham City where the city bonded. People did a pretty assessment on their homes to pay for it or back the debt. Signed up.
Local
People signed up.
ISP, local ISP joined that was already active in the area. That was really
Was
cool.
there?
I loved writing about that.
Yeah, so we come in and we're about to put this company out of business because they were select on Quest network at the time, and we're like, no, we don't want to put you out of business. Why don't you come on our network? And they say, oh, well, that's really cool because coincidentally, Quest was kicking me off of their lines because anytime they went from copper to fiber, they're like, we don't have to be, comply with the 96 Telecom Act and be open and work with Celex. We can kick everybody off. And that put a lot of companies out of business as they've upgraded over the
Yes.
years, all the telecom. So we helped them, right? It totally saved their business. It was mutually beneficial because we loved having a local provider there that people could walk into their shop and to them, right? It was a big deal. So, anyways, we had some success with that and said, hey, guys, look, we can do this. Like, yeah, we had this enormous financial hole and all these mistakes made in the past or whatever, but we know how to do this moving forward successfully. We can build networks that pay for themselves with new subscriber revenues. Let's rinse and repeat, right? And there was just a lot of that convincing these cities to support that because they were frustrated. They're paying on debt. They don't even have a network, right? Very partial, minimal networks had been built by that point. Um, Fast forward a little bit. I left for a few years.
And during
They
this time, I mean, this should be clear also, there's a political pressure because your opponents in the marketplace, your rivals, are funding an organization that does nothing but attack you. they're they have a name that suggests they care about taxpayers, but really they were just focused on trying to like make sure that Comcast and CenturyLink or whatever they were called, Quest over the years, that those companies had an advantage in the market is what it felt like. So, and I'm sure they are ideologically opposed to you too, but there was a lot of like claims and no one else faces that in the marketplace. You guys had an ongoing attack that you were dealing with.
I mean, they pretend to be separated, but at the same time, you're like, well, if the chair of the board of the Utah Taxpayers Association is a lobbyist for Comcast, it's pretty obvious where their loyalties are going to be, right? And these are reasonable, good people on other topics, but that's their job, right? They're going to push these campaigns, right?
Right, some
And
of these
so,
people will switch and later work for the other side, like after they've spent years making an
oh,
argument,
yeah,
which
absolutely.
I always talk about. Like I'm Mr. Naive on this because I can't imagine doing that. But yeah, like these are people that see themselves as doing an important job.
Well, one of the main Provo municipal fiber guys that was one of the leaders there, he works for Comcast these days, right? And he goes out there and criticizes municipal fiber. And I'm like, oh my gosh. If you heard the things he used to say about Comcast back in the day, but I shouldn't say that, but you're right. You're right. And people flip sides based on, their jobs and what those things do change. But I can't imagine. I couldn't go to cable.
Right. So you take a long vacation from Utopia, and then
Full
how do you get
vacation.
lured back?
Things got kind of hijacked a little bit with this concept of this thing is working, but it's not working as fast or as we want. They were working like with a financing partner to like, yeah, let's just go big. Let's just finance the whole finish out of this thing. We'll contract with some other company, and it ended up getting worse and worse over time, and ended up being like, yeah, we don't really need the Utopia people so much. We're gonna bring in this private company, and also to finance this thing, we're just gonna put a bill on every home whether they want the service or not. And that wasn't popular. And started out it was gonna be $8, then it was gonna be 15, then it was gonna be 30, and I'm just like, guys, we're done. Like there was so much bad modeling, bad information, people weren't being truthful about things. I said, I'm not going to participate in this. We had a
And
good thing going. and we need to continue the course, and we could finish this network, and it will do it so well that other cities will want to join. And I wasn't in charge.
Right. But
I
I also want
left.
to say one other thing, which is that a lot of the folks that were saying it's going to be $8, it's going to be $15, it's going to be $30, like these are not people that have like decades of experience in US telecom. Like these were people that claimed that they were smart
Bankers.
people who could just figure it out, right? And I don't know, like whether you look at municipal projects that have struggled, private projects that have struggled, large government projects that have struggled, a lot of it has the same theme of someone who doesn't have a lot of expertise in the area but is a smart person. and I don't know. I've learned a lot about smart people outside of their elements of where they have a lot of experience.
So I take a 3-year vacation to go build a wireless startup with fixed wireless 5G stuff, kind of ahead of its time. And it's very similar to the platform that like Verizon Home Internet and T-Mobile and those guys are doing these days. Same type of spectrum and design in a ways, but and it was a super cool thing. It was with Vivint Internet. Most people know them as a smart home company, but they were doing a internet service. And it was very successful. Put 20,000 customers on real quick, and but anyways,
So when people
that
accuse you of being a fiber person who doesn't know anything about wireless, you can say, whatever, man.
we built fixed wireless networks and went and took customers off fiber, right? And which I'd be like, that can't happen. Well, I would say it shouldn't happen if the fiber provider is a good one. But there were pockets where there was a monopoly and it was too expensive. People make that argument like, oh, once you have fiber in place, you're done. There's nothing to
Mhm.
be done. Well, that's not true if that fiber provider is a bad actor and is providing, terrible customer service and charging too much. And, there's a lot of ways fiber providers can go sideways with their customer base and not
Yeah,
serve
we have
their communities.
140 we have 140 years of experience with electricity that there's still a lot to argue about and to go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, fixed wireless definitely has its place. I've got experience with it. It was awesome. It had, I'm not one that's out there saying the entire world needs to be fiber, and there's nothing short of that will suffice. I'm like, it does not make sense to go spend $500,000 to connect a home with fiber when the home's only worth 200,000, right? Like there are a lot of instances where we're maybe pushing too hard with fiber, but there's other places where we're not pushing hard enough. And we're thinking, oh, cable's good enough. We don't need fiber, right? Like, and I always try to steer the conversation of like, if you can make fiber work, it is good. And there are versions of fiber that are better than other versions. And open access is great. And municipally owned and motivated projects and what they're trying to achieve is very different than what you get from private equity and publicly traded companies hitting quarterly targets and all. Like, there's a lot of competing interests and motivations out there that can cause fiber networks to go sideways with the communities they serve. So anyways, just to kind of wrap things up, I was away. That direction that Utopia was going to really mess this thing up and with a new structure fell through, unsurprisingly, because it was flawed. And the numbers and the data and the things that were put together were not honest. And when things finally got to the point of getting cities to agree to it, they said, this isn't what we were told. We're not going to support this. It fell apart. There was some other turmoil going on, and Utopia found itself without a leader. And they reached out to me and said, hey, would you be willing to come back? And I said, what, I'm making lots of money in private sector, having lots of fun. Why in the world would I ever want to go back? Do you
My
see
emails
this
aren't
office
public.
I'm in? Do you see these, front row tickets to basketball games? My emails aren't public. Do you see this, charter jet to the Dominican Republic trip that I get to go on and all, like all this. Private sector perks can be nice, but my heart wasn't in it, right? At the end of the day, I love public benefit networks, whether that's municipal network, nonprofit. A lot of people think Yellowstone Fiber is a Bozeman municipal fiber project. It's not. It's a nonprofit. The city is supportive, but they don't own it. It's different structure. And I'm like, that's great. It's still public benefit type of thing. I love getting up every day, going out there to provide service that helps people and is motivated by that primarily. And uh, and so, when it was all about hitting some sort of quarterly target and maximizing profit at the expense of customers, It's just it's a different world. There's, I'm still a capitalist. Like I'm not anti-capitalism, but this is a critical service, and there needs to be some checks and balances or competition in the market. And when we run into these monopoly and duopoly situations with bad actors and bad motivations, it you take something that really ought to be a universal type service and harm communities with it. It becomes a tool for making money and leveraging people and enriching, shareholders or investors or whatever, more so than helping people with something they truly need. So, anyways,
I get a kick
there's
out
a
of when
little bit of
people
politics.
I get a kick out of in these discussions when we feel like we have to justify that we're still very pro market or pro capitalist, because like there's no better way to shut down capitalism than to have private equity buy up the streets of America. Like there would be no capitalism anymore if we didn't have these open platforms that were open to everyone on equal terms, and we're like subsidized by like everyone, and there's not to say that our streets are run in the best manner. There's a number of negative externalities, but when there's certain inputs to all business that like you just can't have the market cornered. So it's important.
I think it's important not to paint too broad a stroke across all like private equity, because I mean, we work with some of these companies that are like, we really are in the public benefit of this thing, and we'll extend far more generous terms if we can associate this with those types of public benefits. And, and then there's others that are like, I want to squeeze every dollar out of this thing. Like I'm going to go acquire this little mom and pop, pump a bunch of money in their thing, and then I'm going to dump this thing at a benefit. And you just kind of destroyed this company that's out there, and the people and the jobs and the things that were going well before that. And so, like, I'm not, to your point, it's funny if we like find ourselves trying to justify, like, we're not against all of this stuff. Like there are good actors in all of these types of these categories. But there's a lot of bad actors, and is there a need for some regulation, or no, I hate to even say that word, but it's needed sometimes, right? Or um, and it is also frustrating the force against it. Anytime a city decides, hey, I want to do broadband, right? It's like, oh, here comes this massive opposition. It's like, we need to quit that with that. Like we need to communicate out there the benefits of this stuff. That it is a good model, that it does work, and it's worth the risk and the cost. Even if it does cost the city something. I mean, they build golf courses, they build rec centers, they build all these things. Why? Because it benefits the community. They lose money, but it's worth the investment, or it's their choice of whether it's worth it. How important is this, right? That's why we have elected officials, right? To just make these decisions is this worth it or not, and weigh all the different things and roles of a public agency or the cities that they're responsible for. Does broadband fit in that category? Absolutely. I increasingly am finding myself talking to cities of like, well, yeah, this might be a $50 million, debt. It'll probably pay for itself, but what if it doesn't? Is
Mhm.
it worth $50 million or 100 or whatever it may be? It's like, yes, it is, because look how much you're going to save the residents that much money. Like maybe the city budget doesn't reflect it, but the residents, you're probably putting 50 to $100 million or even more back into the pockets of the businesses and the residents in the community. You're creating the local jobs. You're doing this and this. And Chattanooga did a study where they said, our whatever it was, $400 or $500 million investment has generated $6 billion plus of economic benefit to the community. We just recently completed a similar study. I mean, we didn't, but someone else did a study on the Yellowstone impact, and similar result. It was like, yeah, it's a 5x type, benefit to this community where you have invested in this fiber network. It's like, so why are we arguing over like whether this thing has to pencil for every single dollar of expense has to equal every single dollar of revenue to pay that expense? That shouldn't be the criteria for labeling a municipal project as a success or not.
No, I agree. I will say though, since I feel like just being somewhat self-critical over the course of this, that a fair amount of the people that operate these networks don't set themselves up for the right comparison, right? A lot of people that run utilities, I feel like, which is a lot of cities that have built networks, have structured this like a utility as a part of an electric utility within the system, or they just feel like it's a utility and they structure it more like a utility, which is to say, kind of a boring thing. Then they're not paying as much attention to marketing, and they're not paying attention to like their reputation in the way that they should. And I feel like a lot of government needs to learn how to sell itself, not to missell itself, not to lie and exaggerate, but to help people understand what it does and why it is important. And I think to understand the difference between we have a network where when you have a problem, we're going to fix it quickly with a person who's employed in the community and we are a part of this community, versus we're going to give you a good deal for 6 months and then we're going to find three different ways to like secretly raise your rates and not answer your phone calls and not invest in more upgrades and things like that, while we're pretending that we're like the virtuous option, you know? And I think that and one of the things that I try to do is to urge people to really make sure people are thinking of their network in the way that you just described it, which is that if it can fully pay for itself, great. But like no football stadium that we put public dollars into pays for itself, but people still value it, right? Not everyone, but like enough that we keep doing it.
All of those things, whether it's a football stadium, a golf course, rec center, whatever, like
A
how
water
does
system.
broadband connectivity compare in importance to the community, right? It's like, well, it's like a critical service. It's hard to argue that a golf course is a critical service. It's nice, and not everybody golfs, but some people will benefit from it. Some people will benefit from the pickleball courts. Some people will benefit from this trail system or mountain bike stuff, or skate park, whatever, but broadband will benefit everyone, right? And even if they don't sign up for the service, they probably pay a lower price for the other service because it's competitive. It has to be.
Yes. Yeah, there's a
We
dynamic market. So
make that point
before,
all the time. Like Comcast customers have better Comcast service because of Utopia.
yes.
Cheaper, and it's been upgraded, and there's fewer people on it.
Right.
So it's not
So
as congested.
Comcast Loops might have 200 homes on them or something like that, plus or minus depending on neighborhoods. And so if you take 100 of those customers off, then people are sharing, with far fewer neighbors. And so the older cable networks work out much better where fiber is taking subscribers. But I want to change the conversation a little bit, Roger, and ask you, because you've come on our old show, Connect This, as a special reporter from CES at times, and you're a big technology person. We've talked about that in past interviews. I'm curious, something that we're trying to do with this show is to talk more about technology and kind of the public good and things like that. And I'm curious, especially because for a guy from Utah who is like a family guy who is like, more conservative than many of the guests on our shows, like in Utah, just can be a place that is very family oriented. Like, I'm just curious, how do you react to where tech is going right now? And that's a broad question, so take any slice of it that you like.
It's incredibly exciting and incredibly terrifying at the same time, right? Like there are so many cool things that can benefit our daily lives. That's coming at us like a train. Like, it's from these robots and automated systems, powered by AI and stuff. I mean, like at the CES thing, I'm like, I want that robot snowblower. I want that lawnmower. I want this, this thing that goes around and picks up my laundry off the floor because I'm not good at that. I mean, that's a crazy example, but they have these things, and I'm like, that's so cool. Um, but those are kind of like fun things. But I mean, security cameras, things that automatically identify what's going on. Um, those are great. There's some community critical things like water conservation. We just had the worst winter we've ever had in Utah. This is going to be a terrible summer for Utah. We're going to have the most severe water restrictions we've ever faced. We're going to have wildfire problems, which is a huge problem in Utah. And the ability to put up cameras that can identify fires, and if we can just give first responders an extra 20 minutes or something, that saves lives and property and things like that. So all these technologies that are developing so fast, that's awesome. I love it, right? At the same time, I'm like, oh geez, there's some really bad stuff out here. my kids are getting sucked into, all the social media stuff, but it's getting worse than that. You have, AI friends, and I'm like, just stop that, don't replace real human connection with these like AI bots and other stuff. Like, we're sort of like banning that from our household, and the kids find their ways. You're like, darn it. So I mean, the things, I don't want to get too paranoid on it, but the leaders in AI have absolutely no moral compass. I mean, I hope people see that problem is the companies that are leading in that space are the companies that are least trustworthy to guard against the problems that could come from AI getting out of control. And our government isn't really stepping in, and they need to. And I think it's going to take some real negative examples of things going badly before people take real action. And so again, on the negative side of this stuff, it's going almost too fast. We're seeing some things where we're like, well, we thought this is so cool that you can like automate code, like I love it. I'm
Mhm.
like, hey, I could program something that used to take me 6 months. I can do it in a weekend now. Right. And it's like, this is amazing. Well, some of the best jobs out there used to be software engineers, and now software engineers are out there trying to find jobs, other jobs, and pivot into different careers. And it's like, well, that's, maybe that's a good thing, but it's coming really, really fast and causing really bad problems with people losing jobs, not knowing what to do. We have economic negative things happening to various fields. And the companies that are using these tools just, they don't really care. They're like, if I'm going to have the best quarter, I'm going to have the best quarter, and I'm going to lay off these people, and I'm going to
Right.
pivot my business and whatever at the expense of human benefit. And it's just like, please, let's try to, control the pace of this and put in some ethics and controls. And it's like, oh, we can't do that because then we'll lose the race. We can't lose the race, the
Yeah.
AI
Although I
race.
feel like there are some antecedents that strike me. I mean, like stories about a person who 110 years ago picked up a telephone line and was electrocuted because the safety standards weren't great and they crossed high voltage with low voltage somewhere down the line. And then the person that tried to like save that person also got electrocuted, and like there was like a chain of people kind of that like and this was not as uncommon as you might think if you look back at the newspapers from back then. I will say there's more people and we're rushing faster into things that affect millions of people. Like, you don't have millions of people getting electrocuted at the same time. Fortunately, I'm just going to laugh about that for some reason. But I will say, like, I feel like the human race does have a history of this to some extent. And so, but the danger that I resonates with me is how few companies are controlling all this. And all of this data center, the hyperscalers, is built on the idea of like the one company that will control everything in the future. That's horrifying. It's really not a good model.
And there's even just getting there is causing huge negative impacts, right? I mean, we're building these massive data centers, right? And it's just like the water they're using, the power they're using. I mean, it's just like, Utah, we're building these massive data centers. We're having the worst water situation we ever had. Our power rates are skyrocketing, right? And it's like, well, where's this going? Well, the hyperscalers will pay a premium, and even the broadband industry. We're worried about being able to get fiber cable because the hyperscalers will pay a premium, and they're consuming all of the inventory. At the same time, BEAD's coming in. We're like, yes, we're going to build all these networks on the budget that was approved based on designs from 3 or 4 years ago, right? And we're like, well, oil's up. That affects conduit, boxes, cables up because it's scarce because of the hyperscalers. It's, like there's a lot of just negative impact to moving so quickly in all of these industries that are driven largely by, robotics and AI and all this stuff. At the same time, I'm like, man, if we can get precision agriculture powered by AI with these, robots to go out there and they use less chemicals because they can target, the weeds and other stuff. We can use less water, less chemicals, make people healthier, whatever. I'm like, that's amazing, right? So like, I love it. It's awesome. There's enormous benefit to the automation and implementation of AI and robotics, but man, there's a lot of bad things too.
Are you looking at how your fiber that's underground could be used to detect leaks with fiber optic sensing to try and find leaky water pipes and things like that? It seems like this is coming along?
Yeah, I mean that's a whole other like industry, the fiber optic sensing industry and what can be done. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do with actual fiber, like detecting shaking or whatever signals that affect the light in the fiber, and you can be like, it's really amazing what you can do and how far you can go with that data. Um, but we haven't really gone that route. For us, it's just been connecting things. And so, yeah, there's lots of sensors and stuff like that, but they're just like electronic devices that connect to the fiber, but we're not using like sensory gear on the
Hmm.
lines to detect earthquakes and things. I'm like, we got lots of other earthquake sensors. We got lots of other, ways to sense that, but that is a thing. And then I think at some point we probably may, implement some of that on our network. I mean, we always have spare capacity on all of our routes. So it's like, if we allocated a few fiber strands for some sensing, we could do some cool things.
What's the last question is just what's next? Are you bored? It's a funny question because I feel like you haven't been expanding as much in Utah, and so it feels like you're doing less. And yet the Northern California work may be the most expansive work you've ever done outside of Utah, and so I imagine that's taking a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of joke with our friends over at Golden State Connect Authority because it's like, we're the largest open access municipal system in the country, and they're like, but we're going to be, and we're like, well, do we get to count you as us if you're our partner? So maybe
Definitely
you
on the
don't get to
coaching
become
tree.
biggest. Yeah, but they definitely have that potential. What they're doing right now is a very small first step. That's still a pretty decent sized project. But the organization, the Golden State Connect Authority, is 40 counties, right? And so, that's like a bigger than most states, both by land and by population. And so, yeah, it's the rural counties of California, but California is massive. And there's lots of other cities in the more populated areas that want to do these fiber projects. So even though the current project scope that we're partnered with in California is Golden State Connect Authority, and could definitely become bigger than what Utopia's done, there's a lot going on over there. At the same time, we've got cities all over the country, that have been reaching out to us, and we're like, as long as we can come up with a structure that's mutually beneficial, we're interested, and that
You're
has
not
opened
seeing
a lot of doors.
you're not seeing a thaw then of like
No,
interest.
it's the other way. I think, despite all of this, like, oh, AT&T is doing record, build outs and Google and all these other, and although Google's in transition, I guess we don't really know what they're going to do. AT&T acquiring Lumen, we're like, are we going to see massive new deployment over there? But at the end of the day, it's like, despite all of these massive investments in fiber, there are still thousands of cities out there that are like, what about us? We're not
Yes.
on anybody's radar. And BEAD was a joke. I hate to say that. For the communities that are getting BEAD, it's great. But
But for cities, it was
for
nothing.
cities, there's nothing, right? Somebody has marked your territory as served by bad, outdated definitions of what is good enough broadband and considered served and unserved. And so therefore they got nothing. So there's that in between, right? The most of the big markets are getting served by some monopolistic monster company, and then a lot of the rural areas are getting some help with BEAD, which is great for them. But there is a middle tier that is the smallish city, medium to small cities that are not served well to their standard. Certainly some cable company has said they're served, and you're like, talk to the people. And we run surveys all the time, and the people are like, we hate them. Yes, we have Comcast or Spectrum or whatever, and it's bad. We specifically put a net promoter score in all the surveys we run. Like, how likely are you to recommend what you have? And it's like, wow.
Well,
Negative
you
80, negative.
this isn't just surveys. You've recently built multiple cities that were willing to take on some risk in order to have you provide a third service in the community and we're not debating so much. This wasn't like most people were unserved. Most people had service in several of these places and they wanted another option. So you've seen
Well,
it
yeah.
and you've done it.
Well, it's kind of funny because people are like, well, how many of your cities were considered unserved and you got like grant money for or whatever? I'm like, none of them. 100% of the cities that we have built at Utopia were served by something that met the broadband standards from the federal government, right? They all had cable or you know, some
DSL or
form of
whatever.
DSL or fixed wireless that met the standards, right? But yet all of these cities were like, no, this is terrible. We are dying here. We need better broadband. And we're willing to take the leap of taking on risk and debt and doing this. So it's like, yeah, there's definitely disconnect in these grant programs and the reality of the broadband environment in these communities.
Awesome. Anything else you want to share?
No, other than just like I mentioned, Utopia is out there. I would love to see utopias all over the country, just partnerships. And there are multiple out there that help. I mean, I know Chattanooga even kind of helps with some other cities and consulting and different services. And even in Utah, we have Spanish Fork that's helping Salem and things like that. So there are other partnerships out there. But so I would just encourage, communities that find themselves in that situation and not having good broadband. There is a path forward for you to solve that problem. And it is a good path. And it's worth the effort. It's worth fighting the opposition. It's worth taking on the risk. And your citizens and businesses will love you for it. And if you're, Utopia can be a resource to that. These other partnerships out there can be a resource. There's a lot of consultants. There's some bad consultants, there's some good ones. Maybe look for some recommendations out there. For those who've actually worked projects to completion with operating successful networks.
Freaking call the reference.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. If their only business is doing feasibility studies that never result in real projects, don't use that one.
No.
Find consultants who have demonstrated success of completed and operating successful networks.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Unbuffered podcast. We have transcripts for this and other episodes available at ilsr.org/podcast. While you're there, check out our other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. Email us at podcast@communitynets.org with your ideas for the show. Follow us on Blue Sky. Our handle is @CommunityNets. You can catch the latest research from all of our initiatives by subscribing to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount helps keeps us going. Unbuffered is produced by Christopher Mitchell with editing provided by me, Jordan Pittman. Special thanks to Riverside for providing the song Caveman. Until next time, thanks for listening.